Former Attorney General Pam Bondi made an appearance today speaking with lawmakers about Jeffrey Epstein. In her opening statement obtained by NBC News, Bondi admits the Justice Department made, quote, redaction errors in preparing the files as it pursued accountability and transparency. We should note the Trump administration did not willingly release the files. Congress passed the bill against the president's wishes, which he signed into law after intense political pressure. And those redaction errors have infuriated survivors, as they have spoken about repeatedly with Hallie and also with me on the show. Does it feel like justice?
Right now, justice is a hard word for me to find. If you search Jeffrey Epstein's name, it doesn't come up, right?
You had one job, was to redact our names. They've just completely let us down.
It's hard to believe this was anything other than that it was intentional.
But Bondi also points the finger at her acting successor for the error. She says she had, quote, delegated oversight of the release of the files to then Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. Democrats have slammed Republicans for holding this meeting behind closed doors. Republicans insist they wanted pretty much the same answers that the Democrats want.
The government has failed the survivors. There's no question about that. And that dates back 5 presidential administrations.
NBC's Ryan Nobles covers Capitol Hill, of course. He joins us now. Ryan, what have you heard from survivors today reacting to this? And I think people are still just shocked that we've heard the names of the victims, but not the names of the alleged suspects.
Yeah, there's a great deal of frustration that this investigation really seems to be stuck in neutral from a prosecutorial standpoint. No one else has been held accountable despite all this voluminous information that's been released. But today specifically, not only were the survivors disappointed in what Pam Bondi had to say, they were disappointed in the forum in which she was provided to answer these questions. A closed-door deposition that was not videotaped. She was not forced to take the oath of office. It is illegal to lie to Congress anyway, but they felt that it was important that she actually swear under oath that she would tell the truth. Listen to what one of the survivors said about her testimony today.
This should not be a transcribed interview. Former attorney Pam Bondi should testify under oath on video with a full transcript and recording released publicly, because the American people deserve transparency, and accountability cannot only exist when it's politically convenient.
And there's a lot of frustration from the survivors because there seems to be an uneven standard being held. Some folks, like the Clintons, Bill and Hillary Clinton, they sat for hours. The entire deposition was videotaped. Today's deposition not videotaped. And Maria Farmer, another survivor, said in a statement, at every turn, Bondi has ignored and disregarded the will of Epstein survivors who have waited for justice for decades. And even now, as a private citizen, she refuses responsibility for her missteps and failures.
And Bondi has suggested that Todd Blanche had oversight over the files. She kind of threw him under the bus. He's now the acting AG, right? Do we have any sense at all whether he might make an appearance on Capitol Hill, or is that pretty unlikely?
Well, I think he's going to make an appearance on Capitol Hill. He's almost forced to in his role as acting attorney general. I think the question is, Tom, does he appear in a similar setting to the one that Bondi was in today, a closed-door deposition where he's asked technical, very specific questions by professional staff that kind of understand how to ask questions and focus on what's important in an investigation like this? Democrats want to see that happen. This is what they said.
The request is going in today to Chairman Comer to have Todd Blanche come in. It's clear that after this testimony, that is where a lot of the information is. And so we're going to, if he doesn't do it, we're going to force a subpoena and try to get votes, but he's got to come in.
So the question is, what comes of all of this, Tom? And I think there's an important thing to keep in mind here that Democrats often talk about when it comes to accountability around the Epstein Transparency Act. This is the law of the land. And what I think was an important step in this process was to bring Pam Bondi in and ask her very specific questions about the responsibility that she had as Attorney General to follow the law. Now, there's no world or universe right now where the current Attorney General holds her in some sort of contempt or prosecutes her for not following the law. but they're not going to be in charge forever. And there's the possibility that Democrats could take control of the White House or different chambers of Congress. This law is going to exist if folks that were in charge with following the law did not follow through and do what they were supposed to. There could be repercussions as a result.
Can I just ask this? I hate to blindside you, but I'm assuming that the statute of limitations on the actual, if there were crimes, that statute of limitations has probably passed or will soon. But no statute of limitations, of course, on Congress demanding answers.
No, not on this at all. But you're 100% right about the statute of limitations on some of these perpetrators, but it varies across the map. And I think what frustrates the survivors so much is that you're not even doing that due diligence to figure out who might fall outside or inside that statute of limitations. It just is not happening.
Just frustration boiling over. Ryan, thank you very much.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.